The year is 1997. It's Christmas and you wake up hoping to find a new video game under the tree this year. You open the present and there it is, the new Final Fantasy VII game. You put it into your PlayStation and you are taken on a magical emotional journey. From the beginning, when you put the disc in, to hearing the prelude theme before you even get to that iconic title screen of a sword in the ground to start a new game. Right from the start of the opening cutscene, Final Fantasy VII just starts to fill you up with emotions from just the music alone and how the game looks. Even for the time, it was astonishing. This didn't happen to me. I didn't play Final Fantasy VII until years later. It wasn't my first Final Fantasy game, but when I played the game for the first time, this was the feeling I was getting from the start, and when I started Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was feeling those same emotions all over again. It was like I was a kid playing the original for the first time. Hello everyone, Kingdom Kid here with a review of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now in this video, I will talk about spoilers for not only the remake, but some of the original Final Fantasy VII as well. Just to give you all a clear warning right now. So without further ado, let's begin. But before I get into the review, I want to actually start off with a little history of Final Fantasy VII and the journey it took to become the remake that we got today. From what I mentioned before, it's no surprise that Final Fantasy VII became such a classic. From the opening scene to beautiful music and the unforgettable characters to the combat, this game really does live up to being praised as one of the best Final Fantasy games of all time. It essentially put the series on the map and helped to popularize the PlayStation console. As we were entering the PlayStation 3 era, it's no wonder that people were campaigning and begging Square Enix to make a remaster of this game. And it became even louder when they released a tech demo of Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation 3 in 2005, and then it was silence until 10 years later at E3 2015 when the promise has been made. It was official. Final Fantasy VII Remake was going to happen. Now, people were always wondering, when will it come out? Give us a release date already. You know, the normal things when it comes to these kinds of games. At E3 2019, we finally got an answer. We would see Final Fantasy VII Remake in 2020. The biggest news to come from this, however, was the fact that it will not be all Final Fantasy VII, but instead, the game would be cut up into multiple parts, the first one being only the Midgar section. Now, this section of the game was not that long. It would take at the most 5 hours, even less, to get through. Of course, they also said that they would be expanding on some characters and adding things to make this feel like a full-fledged Final Fantasy game. People were still worried, thinking that they would always have to pay a full price of a game for every chapter of Final Fantasy VII Remake that they release, which is a fair fear to have, and that they would rather have them just be the original Final Fantasy VII game, don't add anything, and just make it a full game with the updated graphics and everything. But in the Final Fantasy VII Remake Ultimania that came out after the game came out, the directors of the game said that they could do that, but you can already play the original Final Fantasy VII on the PS4, and it looks great in that version, so they didn't think it would be fair to the fans who waited so long for this to just do that. It also wouldn't have been a remake if they did just a 1-to-1 scale. I'm glad they did this because we got to know more about all the characters that we didn't know anything about besides their names in the original game, and even got a little more depth with some of the main cast expanded on as well. I didn't know what to expect from the remake, from what I saw in the trailers, but I was excited to see things that would remind me of the original game, but also excited to see all the new things that they would add to the world. One thing that is really good in all Final Fantasy games is the music, and the 7 Remake is no exception. It had all the original music from the original game redone, and it all sounds amazing, from the battle theme to the wandering around the slums. Even some of the new songs they had, like the credit song, it made me swell up with emotions. The combat in Remake is a lot different from the original. For one thing, the original game was a turn-based combat where you had to choose what move you wanted to do. It wasn't a wait until the next person attacks before you attack. You had a time bar that when it was full means you can't attack, and then you release your attack. In Remake, that gets removed and you can do basic attacks without having to wait to actually execute the move. You eventually fill up a bar called the Active Time Battle Gauge. This bar allows you to use different types of abilities and magic spells, or even items in combat. How you get magic and other passive skills on your character is through materia, which I have to say I really like how they did the materia in the remake. They give you your basics elemental attacks like fire and ice, and the ability to heal yourself and others with cure. But there's other kinds of materials that will give you a boost in HP or MP, or make your basic attacks have an elemental effect to them, or you have a higher resistance to that elemental, depending on if it's linked to your weapon or to your armor. In order to level up your materia so that you can use stronger spells or have a higher boost in HP or MP, you need to have them equipped, and after you defeat an enemy, you acquire ability points or AP, which is the experience needed to level up materia. Another special kind of materia you get is summon materia, where you bring out a summon in a fight. As soon as the summon gauge is full and you have the appropriate amount of ATP needed to summon the creature. Summoned allies also have their own abilities that cost ATP to use, but are very helpful when you get overwhelmed. Once you get party members to fight alongside you, you can easily switch to play as the characters by pressing any of the dialogue buttons on your controller. Each character has a unique skill and abilities that only they can use. In order for you to get those new skills, you get new weapons for each character, and to make sure you can use that skill when you don't have that weapon equipped is to master that skill by using it again and again in combat. There is a way to give you a bonus points to get the skill faster, but if you just keep using it as soon as you can, you will get the skill in no time. You can also upgrade your weapons as well. With every level up you acquire some battle points, or BP, which you can use to give your weapons an added ability, which can be a new materia slot or make it so that you have a higher chance of getting a critical attack. There are other ways to get BP through manuscripts. You can't get them all unless you go through the game again while on hard mode and complete specific tasks on hard mode as well. While you are in combat, the enemies will mostly focus on the character that you are playing as, and your party members' ATP gauge doesn't build up as fast as the character you are playing as, since you are doing more. But when their gauge does fill up, you can tell them how to use it. They won't do anything besides basic attacks unless you tell them what to do. And also if they have an auto cure materia on, where they will heal a party member who is low on health as long as they have the MP and the ATP built up to use it. It's also important to know that you can get interrupted when using a magical spell or an ability, so to play it safe you can build up ATP with one character and then switch to another character, so the enemy's focus is now away from them while you can tell them to heal them either themselves or someone else who needs it. Another mechanic that they introduced in this game is the pressure and stagger system. Each enemy has a bar under their health that slowly fills up with every attack you use on them, and fills up more if you exploit a weakness. If you exploit a weakness, or after an enemy uses an attack or misses an attack, they fall under pressure, which means that the bar will build up faster, and if you use your focus attack skill, it will go up even more than normal. When the pressure bar is full, the enemy will become staggered, where they will receive more damage and be stunned until the bar empties. If you use Tifa's unique ability or one of Aerith's weapon skills, you can actually build up the stagger percentage to have the enemy receive even more damage. I really like this mechanic as it was very helpful in some fights later in the game. That's basically the gist of the combat, and I'm glad they improved on it, and I enjoyed the combat a lot. Yes, you can have issues with cameras and positioning of your characters, but a quick fix for that is to just switch over to another character for a short while to get their focus off the other characters and to continue the fight. For the most part of the story, the remake is pretty close to the original, with exceptions of some areas and even adding things like side missions and chapters to build more depth with characters that didn't get much of a development in the original, like Jessie, Wedge, and Biggs. And because of those chapters, we learned more about them, and it made the game much better for it. Now, I could go through the whole story and tell you how it was different from the original, or if it was added in the remake. I will mention some of the changes that I like. One of those changes is that we get to see Sephiroth, the main antagonist of the game, much earlier than we did in the original. Through the whole game, Cloud gets these headaches that are then followed by a vision of seeing Sephiroth, telling him some cryptic things that make sense from the original game. In the original game, you actually don't even hear Sephiroth's name until close to the end of the Midgar section. But the developers figured that since so many people already know about him, that they figured they could introduce him sooner in the game to expand more on his relationship with Cloud. Another change that they did was adding Chapter 4 into the game, where you got to hang out more with Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge, and they even introduced a new character, a soldier named Roche. And he was my favorite new character that they included into this game, and I love him so much. I really wish they showed more about him, but hey, I guess that's what the future games are for. Another change that they did that I like was when you reach Chapter 9 in the remake and get to Wall Market. They changed it a lot, it was great. In the original, you have to go around town, grab different items for Cloud so that he can wear a disguise to sneak into the audition for Don Corneo with Aerith in order to rescue Tifa. In the remake, you head to the Don's house and meet a new character named Leslie, who tells you that only women who have been approved by one of the trio can get into the auction. So this already introduced not only one character, but 3 other characters, and I like that a lot because I loved all the new characters that they introduced. You strike out with 2 of the 3 before you make your way to Madame M's place, who gives Cloud a hand massage, and I just have to say, all of those cutscenes with all the massages are fantastic. If you can, I would recommend watching them all. I also would recommend going for the luxury class when you're playing this game. After the massage, Madame M tells them that she will dress Aerith up and give her approval if Cloud wins in an underground tournament. I like this tournament because it again expands on things that goes on in Wall Market, and at the end of the tournament you face the Hell House, which was just a random encounter that you fight, but in the remake they made it into a full-fledged interesting boss fight. Once you win the tournament, you return to Madame M's and she gives you a list of side missions to complete. Once you go back to her place to see if Aerith is done, Johnny, a character who you met in Section 7 Slums, comes and tells you to come to Don Corneo's house with him because he knows that Tifa is there now. When you arrive, Cloud tells him to go tell Aerith to wait for them while he talks to Leslie about getting in. Cloud realizes that it could be more dangerous than he initially thought, and then he sees Aerith walk up to him, and it all depends on what dress you get Aerith. The cutscene changes here too, and I really like that. I always recommend go for that red dress though, so make sure you complete all those side missions with Aerith, because that's the best dress for her. Afterward, Aerith tells Cloud that he has caught the eye of one of the trio, Andrade Rode, and that he could be a way to get Cloud into the audition. When you arrive at the Honeybee Inn, which is owned and operated by Andrade, they had some changes to this as well. You can still peek into some of the rooms and see what's inside, but they took out the scene where Cloud walks into a room that a bunch of muscular men are in, and they clean Cloud up if you choose to stay, since this is how you got one of the items needed for Cloud to get into the audition in the original game. But since you aren't collecting items in the remake, there was no need for them to keep this scene. Instead, what you had to do was show off your dance moves to impress Andrade so he would give you his approval. Once you show off your sick moves, Andrade helps get Cloud ready in a dress, and he and Aerith make their way to the Don's house for the audition. In the original game, depending on what items you got for Cloud would decide whether or not Corneo would pick Cloud or one of the other girls, but in the remake he will always pick Cloud. Once Corneo takes Cloud away and Tifa and Aerith break free from his goons, they corner Corneo and have him spill the beans that Shinra plans to cause the Sector 7 plate to fall and destroy Sector 7 slums in order to get rid of Avalanche and to blame them in the process. It then starts following the original story here, where Corneo pulls a switch and puts them down into the sewers to fight his pet monster in order for them to get back to the slums before it's too late. This is one of my favorite sections of the games because of how much they expanded in the original. Another change from the original is that through the game, every now and then you would have a run-in with these specters. For the most part of the game, they interfere with the characters to put them on the path of how the original game went. You learn that things are called whispers and are the arbiters of fate, the will of the planet, to make sure that everyone and everything stays close to the flow of destiny. I think this was a very interesting thing to add to the game because they are here to make sure that the story of the remake stays similar to how it was in the original, but some things have already changed. One of those things is Wedge. When Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith return to the slums, they hear a gunfight happening on the pillar and see Wedge as he falls from the pillar down to the ground. In the original, Wedge is a lot worse off than he was in the remake, and this was actually the last time we saw Wedge in the original, which leads many to believe that this is how he died. In the remake, Wedge isn't that badly hurt and eventually tries to convince some Shinra guards to open the gates to let people through so that they can evacuate before the plate falls. And when it comes to Biggs and Jesse, you run into them as you're making your way up to the top of the pillar as Cloud and Tifa, and you see how they die, similar to how it was in the original. Cloud, Barret, and Tifa fail to prevent the plate from falling and escape, and in the remake we see some debris fall on top of Wedge, leading us to believe that he was crushed. But you make your way back to Sector 7 slums in the next chapter to see what was all left, and you see one of Wedge's cats, and he leads you back to Wedge, who turns out to be alive. This was added to the remake, since in the original you don't go back to the slums and instead start making your way to save Aerith. This was when things start changing from the original game, since Wedge died, but in the remake he survives, and we see some of the failed experiments that Shinra worked on. You take Wedge back to Aerith's house and prepare to go to Shinra Tower to go save Aerith, and this was another add section in the game where you can do the last set of side missions, and they also changed how you climb up to the plate. In the original, you climb a wire to get up, but in the remake they have you help Leslie track down Don Corneo, saying if you help him, he will help you get away up to the plate. I like this because in this we learn more about Leslie, in that his fiance was a girl that Don Corneo picked and as one of his brides in the past, and now Leslie is out for revenge against Don. However, he escapes and we have to fight his monster pet again, and then we give Leslie hope that his fiance could still be out there and that he could still find her. Once we help Leslie, he gives us grappling guns so that we can make our way up to the plate. This is also another section that they expand upon in the remake and put a boss at the end that you would actually space later on in the game, and I like that touch as well. You get into Shinra Tower and you could pick either between the stairs or the elevator like in the original, and I love how they did this. If you pick the stairs, they made it hilarious. Just the banter that the three characters have is so charming. You find out Aerith is being held, and this has changed as well. In the original, you save Aerith and meet Red 13, but get caught and locked up, and when you escape, you find out that Sephiroth killed President Shinra, and that the groups get blamed for it, and Cloud tells everyone to get out while he fights Rufus, the president's son. Tifa stays behind while Barret, Aerith, and Red fight another machine while leaving. Once Cloud beats Rufus and he runs away, Cloud and Tifa catch up to the rest of the group and make their escape in a truck and on a motorcycle, and you do some more fights, and then that would be the end of the Midgar section as you all decide to go start looking after Sephiroth. In the remake, this gets changed. Once you learn where Aerith is, you rescue her, and the scientist Hojo reveals that Cloud wasn't in Soldier, something you don't learn until way later in the original game. But before he could reveal more, he gets swept away by the Whispers. You then go to the old room that Aerith had, and this is where you learn about the Whispers from Red and get a transmission from Wedge, who came to the tower to help the group escape. While the group tries to escape, they run into Sephiroth and get temporarily separated from each other. Now in the original game, Red 13 would be a part of your party here, but they didn't do that in the remake. They just had him be a guest character, one you don't control and act on his own. The reason they chose to do this makes sense to me because you only have 2 chapters left in this game, so it wouldn't make sense to have another party member join the group where you can't play with him except for this last bit. Yes, there are a decent amount of fights still left, but still not enough fights that the rest of the party have had so far. They all meet up but are still separated, and in order to regroup they have to go through some tests set up by Hojo. Once the group gets back together, they make their way up to the rooftop of the building. In order to reach it, they had to go past through President Shinra's office. As I mentioned before, in the original, we would have found him dead, but in the remake they changed it to where he is hanging off the edge of the building and Barret picks him up, and eventually Shinra pulls a gun on Barret, and we actually get to see Sephiroth stab Shinra. Barret gets upset and tries to attack Sephiroth, but instead Sephiroth stabs and kills Barret, which did not happen in the original. The Whispers cover him and heal him. While that goes on, the rest of the group fight an illusion of a form of Genova, a very interesting fight indeed. When the fight is over, it turns out that the illusion was actually the sick man that Cloud met in an earlier chapter of the game. Sephiroth picks him up and heads to the top of the building. Cloud gives chase and we see Barret be revived by the Whispers, and Red says that this wasn't the death that Barret was supposed to have. When Cloud reaches Sephiroth, he jumps off the building while holding the sick man, and it's revealed that that wasn't actually Sephiroth, but instead another man that Cloud met earlier in the game who is similar to the sick man. Things get back to how it was in the original game, but when the group escaped from the tower, they notice that the whole tower was engulfed in Whispers, and we see a scene where Wedge is trying to leave the tower, but he gets pulled back in by the Whispers, leaving his fate unknown since it fades to black. Although you hear the sound of glass breaking, so it could sound like they pushed him out of the building. Again, it's still unknown. We also see Rufus walk through the building, and we see that he can see the Whispers as well, which is very interesting to me. After the heroes make their escape from Shinra troops, this would be the end of the Midgar section of the original game. But instead they run into Sephiroth again and learn that he is going to change the course of destiny, and that is why the Whispers are interfering a lot, but Sephiroth is able to fight past them. We also get a scene of Zack and see what was originally his last stand at the end of Final Fantasy Crisis Core. This really hit me in the feels because I love Zack so much, and having to relive his final moments really hit me hard. Sephiroth creates a portal to a different dimension and awaits for us to follow him. Aerith tells the group that if they go in and win, they would be changing not only fate itself, but they would be changing themselves as well. The group agree that they have to stop Sephiroth since he is the biggest threat to the planet. When they walk through the portal, the group first have to fight a creature that was created when all the Whispers combined. During the fight, they all see visions of things that will happen if they fail. Red running with 2 cubs, Cloud and Sephiroth having a clash, an orb of materia falling to the body of water, and hands praying together, which is a very iconic scene in the original game. And finally, Cloud laying a body down in a body of water. Those last 2 scenes hit really hard for me because in the original game, that was when Aerith died. When Sephiroth killed Aerith in the original game. The materia that is in her hair falls into the water, and Cloud just lays her to rest into the water. So that's very interesting that they put those scenes in there. I'm wondering how they're going to work on this in the future. After you win, you are teleported again and start the final fight against Sephiroth. It starts off as a one-on-one fight between Sephiroth and Cloud before eventually Tifa and Aerith joining the fight. You eventually win, and then Cloud and Sephiroth get transported to a different place that Sephiroth calls the Edge of Creation and have another clash before Sephiroth disarms Cloud and he leaves him by saying he has 7 seconds till the end and wonders what he will do with it. We also see the aftermath of Zack's fight, which brings up big implications. Zack survives when he was supposed to die. This changes everything and creates what I believe to be an alternate timeline. We still have the timeline that we are currently on where Zack died, but now, since we defied fate and beat the Whispers, that caused Zack to defy fate as well to survive, and it opens up the doors to many things to come in the future installments of this game. We then see how the citizens of Sector 7 start cleaning up the mess to rebuild their homes, and thanks to Wedge, more people survive than in the original game. We also learn that Biggs somehow survived the plate collapsing as well, which brings in more changes. Now, it could be possible that Jesse survived as well, but we don't know that yet, and we don't know if Wedge is still alive either. I hope that is the case because I feel like we could still learn more about each of these characters. We return to the main group as they all agree to go after Sephiroth, that even though Cloud beat him, he's still a big threat to the planet. As they all start leaving Midgar, we see what happens in the other timeline with Zack carrying an unconscious Cloud back to Midgar. And then we see a scene where the current timeline of Cloud and Aerith passing by the timeline of Zack and Cloud happening in slow motion. And I just love this scene so much because all three of those characters have a strong connection to each other and it just works out great. And I just love how this works. And it leaves me wondering, how will this all tie up in the future? The game ends with the words, "The unknown journey will continue," and I couldn't think of a better way to end the first part of this expansion of the Final Fantasy VII world. Now, there are many things you can do after you beat the game. Once you beat the game, it unlocks hard mode where you can go through all the chapters again to get manuscripts that give you more BP to upgrade your weapons further, as well as the ability to jump to any chapter you want with chapter select. Another thing you can do in hard mode is try to fight the secret boss, but in order to do that, you have to beat all the Coliseum challenges, Chadley, another character that they introduced, who gives you battle intel reports, and complete all but one of Shinra's combat challenges, since the last one is the secret boss. And with chapter select, it makes it easier to get all you need to get everything that you need to do. Is this game perfect? Not at all. People will have issues with it in one way or another. They might not like the combat, how the game ends, or something else. But for me, I found the combat to be, while hard at some points, it was easy to understand and I got the hang of it very quickly. Especially going through hard mode. You basically have to learn how to fight in hard mode since you can't use items at all. I enjoyed my time playing this game. As I mentioned before, it brought me back to how I felt when I played the original all those years ago, and worries that I had about the future are not as big as they were before. When it comes to comparing this game to the original, I can see an argument of should you play the original before playing the remake, and to me, I think it doesn't matter all that much. When it comes to story, it's pretty much the same until you get to the last 2 chapters of the remake when things take a different turn. I feel like while it's understandable that you will be confused at the end of the remake, you can't compare the two fairly in terms of story yet until we have seen all the games for the remake. You can compare the sections of the original game to the remake, but I feel that's as far as you can go until we get more of the remake as a whole. I feel like the main issue everyone has with the ending is the whole fact that Zack surviving, and I totally understand that feeling. But to me, I'm more interested to see, okay, how is this all going to tie up with the future installments? But if you're just following the whole story of the Midgar section of the original game, it's pretty much the same. And then they just add that section of Zack surviving because of us being the Whispers and defying fate. Everything else seems pretty much the same until that point of the game. Now, but again, that's something that feels like will be expanded upon in the future, and it gives an interesting thought into people's heads about it. You may get lost in how this changes things compared to the original, but if you really want to understand them better and maybe prepare yourself more for when the next part of the remake comes out, you can go back and play the original Final Fantasy VII and maybe watch the cutscenes from Crisis Core, since the only way you can play the game is on a PSP with a physical copy or through emulations to understand how Zack ties into the plot as a whole better than as a whole, since you learn more about Zack in Crisis Core. To me, this game feels like one big love letter to not just fans of the original Final Fantasy VII, but to all Final Fantasy games, both new and old. And while some may not like the ending of the remake as others, there is no denying how much love that the team behind the remake put into making the game, and for that I say thank you to everyone behind this game, and I can't wait to see what you all create in the future. I want to thank everyone for watching this video, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on the remake. Did you play this before playing the original, and after playing the remake, did it make you want to play the original? Let me know. And if you guys are interested, I did do a full playthrough of the game on my other channel, RPG Kingdom Kid. A link to the channel as well as the first video of this series will be in the description down below. Thank you all for watching once again. I've been Kingdom Kid, and I'll see you all next time.